Everyone. So the research design I will be sharing with you today is grounded theory. Since I spent so much time trying to better understand this research design, I've really kind of taken a liking to it. I know that I will be doing qualitative research, but we all know that it's difficult to generalize. And so one thing that I really like about this research design is although it's qualitative, it really isn't trying to do that. It's trying to develop a theory that's grounded in the data that is collected. Grounded theory is also known as the process theory. Creswell explains the idea of being grounded as being grounded in the data, and because it's grounded in the data, it provides a better explanation than some borrowed theory, because as Creswell explains, it fits the situation, it actually works in practice, and it's sensitive to the individuals in a setting, and represents all of those complexities. Patton explains grounded slightly differently, as grounded in the observations, and that theory is usually developed through the process of making those observations. To put it simply, in grounded theory, qualitative researchers start with the data and then develop theories based on the data. This is vastly different than most quantitative approaches where a deductive approach is taken. They typically don't look at the data collected to then develop a new theory. This is unique then to grounded theory. Creswell gives us 6 key characteristics of grounded theory that are important to keep in mind. The first is the process approach. A single idea might be explored by grounded theorists, but it's a lot more likely that a process is being examined. Categories are then used, which are themes of basic information identified in the data by the researcher and used to understand a process. Second is theoretical sampling, which refers to how the data is then collected for that process approach. It's qualitative, so it's done through observations, often interviews, looking at respondents' diaries or journals, etc. Grounded theorists also use what is referred to as an emerging design, meaning the data is collected and then analyzed immediately, so decisions can be made about what data to collect next. This is done until saturation is achieved, which is a subjective determination that no new data will provide any new information or insights. Next 2 key characteristics are constant comparative analysis and a core category. Constant comparative analysis is an inductive or specific to broad format for data analysis, where incidents in the data are compared to other incidents, incidents to categories, and categories to other categories. This is that idea of grounding the categories in the data. Coming up with a core category is when the researchers reveal all those major categories and select one as a central phenomenon for the theory. Another key characteristic discussed by Creswell is theory generation. Theory generation is critical as it's really the point of grounded theory. All of the data collected, the creating of categories, all lead to generating a theory that, as I've said too many times, is grounded in the data. Remember, though, it's close to the data, so it does not have a wide scope. The end result or theory is presented as a visual coding paradigm, a series of propositions or hypotheses, or as a story written in narrative form. The last key characteristic discussed by Creswell is memos. Memos are basically what they sound like. They're what researchers use throughout this process, notes the researchers use that they write throughout the research process to elaborate on ideas about the data and the coded categories. Trying to connect this to another design is a little challenging because I feel like my knowledge of the other designs is still emerging. However, I'd say although there are many differences, there's definitely some similarities with ethnographies. I do know that both are attempting to study phenomenons in their natural contexts. Both do attempt to use multiple points of entry for collecting data, and in both methodologies, the researcher attempts to report the data from the perspective of the participants who have experienced the phenomenon. So, when should you as a researcher consider using grounded theory? Well, there's some questions you can ask yourself before selecting grounded theory as your research design. Are you looking for a broad theory or explanation of a process? Do existing theories fail to address the problem or the participants that you plan to study? Do you wish to study a process? Do you want to explain the actions of people? Or are you a beginning researcher who wants a step-by-step systematic procedure for analyzing data? All right, so where did this idea of grounded theory come from? It's been around since the 60s and was developed by the 2 sociologists on the screen, Glasser and Strauss. These 2 recorded and published their method of research while they were working with terminally ill patients at a medical center in California, and they were contacted, which led to them writing a book, The Discovery of Grounded Theory. They felt like research in sociology overly stressed verifying and testing theories instead of using actual field data from participants to discover the variables and hypotheses. So fast forward to the 90s, and we start to see some controversy surrounding grounded theory when Strauss teams up with Corbin, a community nursing health researcher, and introduced a much more prescriptive format for grounded theory with predetermined categories. Wait, what? What happened to Glaser? Well, some new qualitative researchers liked this new approach, but Glaser wasn't one of them. He was very critical of this idea of using preconceived categories and frameworks instead of the theory emerging during the process, as they discussed in their book. So the controversy isn't over yet. Then Kathy Charmaz comes onto the scene. She's now considered one of the most important thinkers in grounded theory methodology. She jumped in and asked, well, who's got the real grounded theory? She used this opportunity to promote her own constructivist approach to grounded theory. She introduced the idea that grounded theorists should stress flexible strategies, emphasize the meaning participants ascribe to situations, and acknowledge the roles of the researcher and the individuals being researched. So now that we're all successfully confused, who's right? Well, three dominant designs emerged out of all of this, so everyone wins. We now have three grounded theory designs. We have the systematic design created by Corbin and Strauss, the emerging design created by Glaser, and the constructivist approach, which is credited to Charmaz. So let's take a closer look at each of these three designs. First up, we have the systematic design, which is often used in educational research. It emphasizes the use of data analysis steps of open, axial, and selective coding and the development of a logic paradigm or visual picture of the theory that's generated. Three phases to this coding: open coding, where the grounded theorist forms initial categories; axial coding, where one open category is selected as the core phenomenon and then related to the other categories; and selective coding, where the grounded theorist writes a theory based on the interrelationship of the categories. So the emerging design came out of Glasser's quite extensive critique of Strauss. Glasser was not a fan of Strauss and Corbin putting so much emphasis on rules and procedures, preconceived categories, and he questioned if they were putting too much emphasis on theory verification rather than theory generation. Glasser then stressed the need to let the theory emerge from the data rather than these preconceived categories. Glasser emphasized the objective of grounded theory being connecting categories and the idea of emerging theory. And the third and final design, we have Charmaz's constructivist design. Of course, aligning with constructivism, her main focus is on the meaning ascribed by participants in the study. She suggests straying from any aspects that obscure experiences of the participants, such as jargon, diagrams, or even conceptual maps. She does suggest active coding and making decisions about the coding throughout the study and not minimizing the role of the researcher in the process. So to demonstrate a grounded theory design, I examined a published journal article that is a grounded theory design. I wanted to demonstrate the major characteristics of grounded theory, but within my area of research interest, which is the inequities in our education system, social justice, etc. The article that I looked at is entitled Exploring Empathy to Promote Social Justice Leadership in Schools and was written in 2017 and published in the Journal of School Leadership. In this study, the abstract itself specifies a grounded theory approach, and I quote, "This study examines how 57 aspiring school leaders understand what it means to lead for social justice in K-12 schools. Grounded theory was employed for this qualitative study. The data collected included 855 audio and video reflections, 513 written narratives, 57 equity audits, and field notes. The method section demonstrates the theory generation component. Specifically, in this study, grounded theory research was used in order to develop an educational leadership development model from the data. The researchers specifically state in the research that grounded theory was used in order to develop an educational leadership developmental model from the data. It afforded the researchers with the opportunity to develop theory as it emerged from the data, directly quoting Glaser and Strauss. Researchers decided to go with the constructivist approach. They felt it was important to have the students' voices. They felt this constructivist approach to grounded theory would allow for rich, multidimensional data for a deepened appreciation of diverse perspectives regarding how school leaders understand what it means to lead for social justice and promote issues of equity. They also felt this methodology allowed them to not only pause and look at the participants' views, but also their own. Researchers also used the key component theoretical sampling. Qualitative data was collected through audio-video reflections, written narratives, equity audits, and field notes. They also instilled protocol for collecting and analyzing data immediately. For example, when participants submitted responses to reflective questions, they were given one-day response feedback when new questions were proposed, understandings were summarized, etc. The researchers worked to develop an ongoing rapport with participants and provided opportunities to hear all of the voices in the study. Researchers also employed constant comparative analysis. These grounded theorists, researchers, determined which initial codes made the most sense, then identified consistent categories that had consistency across a majority of the audio, video, written narrative, and equity audits, completing the first round of open coding. They then analyzed these codes again as they worked to establish patterns. They compared incidents to other incidents, which helped generate emerging concepts and hypotheses. So memoing, also a key component of grounded research as we know, was also employed. The article specifically states, and I quote, "Theoretical sorting of memos played a significant role in generating an emergent conceptual framework for the full articulation of a grounded theory through our memos sorted and fully integrated." Researchers were able to simplify their list to 38 open codes. They then found that several of the codes formed the category "the need for understanding social justice-oriented teachings," thus establishing the core category of grounded theory studies. They then were able to collapse several of the previous codes into four themes. 1. Understanding social justice-oriented pedagogies. 2. Immersing oneself in culturally diverse contexts. 3. Increasing critical consciousness. And 4. Deepening empathic responses. Lastly, but likely the most critical component, is the generated theory based on the data. Specifically, the researchers state in their discussion, findings suggest that immersing oneself in transformative learning environments in which social justice-oriented work is embedded throughout their coursework is critical to deepening empathetic responses. They go on to state, our theory, which is expressed as a set of concepts related to one another in a cohesive way through a conceptual model, accounts adequately for all of the data we collected. The resources that I used are included on the screen. I hope that through watching this presentation that you have a better idea or perhaps a better understanding of what grounded theory is in terms of a research design. And thanks for watching.